It was kind of accidental. My whole musical career was accidental. You know, I left college and moved to New York to be in a rock band, and I didn't know how to do it. And one thing led to another. I started learning how to be a musician, and New York wasn't cutting it, so I moved to LA, and I was playing in different bands. First of all in clubs, playing other people's music. Then I started working with original music, not mine yet. Made some albums with a few singers. And some friends of mine got a job writing music for a movie, a really terrible movie. Ultimately it was called Hollywood Zap. And they originally hired me to program synthesizers because they couldn't afford too many musicians. It was a real low budget thing. And they were supposed to come up with a few rock cues the director wanted. And they didn't. One of them was a jazz guy and the other was a folk guy. And the director was really upset and thinking about firing them. So I said, look, you guys clear out of the studio for a day and I'll write a couple of rock tunes. So I wrote a couple of rock tunes. I hired some heavy-hitting rock musicians that I knew. And literally a day later, brought them in. The director was there. We played these songs. Director loved them. Next thing I knew, I was a composer. I was a film composer. They gave me credit for co-writing a bunch of the music, which I did more and more of. And the sound supervisor and editor of that film remembered my attitude. He said I had a really positive attitude. And he was the editor of My Chauffeur. And he hired me to write some incidental music for that. They'd already bought a lot of music for My Chauffeur before I came in. So I wrote about 20 minutes of synthesized stuff that they needed to fill the gaps. And that gave me my first real credit as a single person composer. And I realized I really loved it. I didn't know that before I did it, but doing it, I realized not only did I love it, but I was pretty good at it. And in 1986, the year before Bloodsport was filmed, I was called in to write some music for a children's storytelling video that was produced by a guy named Mark DeSalle. It was a rescue job. They'd hired somebody else and threw out the score because it sounded like somebody playing an organ on top of the whole thing. And so in like 3 days, I wrote this, I don't know, close to an hour's worth of music. I did it on the fly in a friend's house. He had a little 8-track recorder. We knocked it off. Mark loved it and remembered me. So when he came back from Hong Kong, I got in touch with him and said, hey Mark, would you give me a shot at working on Bloodsport? And I didn't know if he would. I didn't know if he already had somebody else in mind. But he invited me down to see a cut of the film at Cannon. And I watched it with him and Newt Arnold. And at the end of it, I was thinking, okay, what am I going to say? How am I going to get this from him? And I didn't say anything. I had a tape that I was going to hand him, maybe to show him some other stuff I'd done. At the end, he just said, you want the job? Canada is paying you X amount of dollars. If that's okay with you, you got the job. So that's how I got Bloodsport. I don't think I met Van Damme for the first time until we had this screening in the summer of '87, after we were done. I mean, I think we mixed it in April or something like that. I don't remember. I remember I was working on it in March. And so I didn't meet him then. I met him a few times when we were working on Kickboxer, but it was always just, you know, hello, nice to see you. He was very polite to me. I've heard he could be kind of demanding Well, he never was with me. He was just very nice, a really nice guy, to me anyway.
Nothing can destruct you, so that you see and feel nothing except your own energy.
Technology back in 1987 was not what it is today. You know, you can't throw the film into your computer and sync the music to it almost automatically. I mean, you do have to do some things, but it's not hard. I didn't have that. I had a little standalone sequencer and a VCR, and I'd have to try and get them started at the same time. So I got pretty good at it. I got pretty fast at it, but it was not always in sync, and I had to play things over and over and over to make sure that I really did have those fight things where I wanted. You know, I had to have beats. I had beats going with the drums, and they had to hit certain points. I know that musicians sometimes notice that I used a lot of odd time bars, you know, weird. It wasn't all 4/4. Part of the challenge was to make sure that it didn't feel weird. It didn't feel like, you know, falling down the stairs. It had to feel like the pulse was continuing in a normal fashion. So that was a challenge to make that work. You know, I had to make the drums play fills that would bring these measures together. It was, you know, it was a challenge. I did a lot of mathematics too, trying to figure out what tempo to use. There's a lot of shifting tempos. Pretty marginal. The computer does it automatically now, but then I had to figure out, you know, okay, am I playing at 117.6 beats per minute, or 118, or 121? You don't notice that. I actually still have a record of all those things, and the times were shifting all over the place, but you don't feel it. You know, you would only feel it if you made the tempo drastically faster or slower. So that was a challenge.
That's why they call this thing Bloodsport, kid.
Nobody told me Asian. I did that on my own. Mark DeSalle loved temp music, so he would stick temp music everywhere. So I kind of knew from that what kind of beats he wanted. I mean, I didn't copy any of the temp music other than, okay, here's a kind of a beat. And all the fight scenes, he had what we used to call 4 on the floor, where the kick drum is playing quarter notes like this. So that's where I got that idea, is that I used that throughout the fight scenes. I got 4 on the floor. And, well, sometimes it's 3 on the floor and 2 on the floor and 6 on the floor, but I kept this pulsing kick drum always through the fights. And that's what I learned from the temp music in that regard. I mean, he stuck songs places, and I would have to try and figure out, okay, well, he kind of likes this kind of thing here, so I'll have to do something that doesn't sound like it, but has the kind of emotional appeal.
Oh, yeah!
Well, the sound guy didn't want me to use drums at all, probably, because he wanted his hits to be really loud. But I was pretty careful that, for the most part, well, we didn't clash. And at times in the mix, one or the other would get pulled down. Like when the song Fight to Survive comes on the first time, they just pulled the soundtrack and just used the music. They pulled out all the hits, which was helpful for me, because then I didn't have to worry about the clashing. But I didn't know going in that's what they were going to do. I just wrote, now interestingly enough, I wrote the backing track for that song to picture. I didn't just write a song and let them cut it in. I actually made the song fit. It's kind of a weird song, a song that only has, I think, one verse, but it's It fits the picture.
I've worked hard every night and day, so I'm prepared to make my way. Mind and body are a perfect team. Now's my chance to live my dream.
One of the big deals was money. It was pretty low budget. And I had what's called an all-in budget. In other words, Canon plainly said they weren't going to cover any expenses. They were going to give me a check, and I had to deliver the music. And if there were any residuals ordered by musicians, I had to pay them. So it was a non-union gig. I did hire a few really good musicians, and I had to tell them, look, you got to sign a waiver. This is it. I'm going to pay you these dollars, and we're done. We're done here. So that was an issue. I had to, I had to pay for the studio. I did it on 24-track tape, and I didn't want to do it on somebody's 8-track. I wanted to use, and I did it at fast speed rather than slow speed. So I had to buy something like 9 reels of 24-track tape, and that was a good chunk of my budget, And I had to hire an engineer, and I couldn't engineer in the old-fashioned studios myself. Plus, I was so burnt out by the end of the time I was composing, working 16 hours a day, every day, that I needed somebody with fresh ears to do the recording. So, yeah, I think I ended up with a little bit of money to pay myself. I think maybe about 40% of the budget I kept for myself. But I could only do that by being really frugal and careful and doing as much as I could myself. An awful lot of what you hear was just me. I hired one drummer to just come in and play hi-hat. Really, really good drummer, Denny Fongheiser. And then I hired a percussion player, M.B. Gordy. I spent a whole day with him. He brought in a truckload of stuff. And a lot of weird sounds that he came up with. And then I had a guy named Jamie Schmidzinski play this Chinese harp thing in a few places. That only took about half an hour because I knew what I wanted. I told him how to tune it before he got there, and we just did these things, and he was out.
Everyone you win, everyone you choose, everyone you chase, everyone you lose. Every time you cry, every time you lie, everywhere you look, they just never know.
The thing was that, they thought they were going to have plenty of time between finishing the edit, which I had to have locked, and going into the soundstage. But they'd already booked the soundstage, and the edit took longer than they thought. So I had 5 weeks, and it took me about 3.5 weeks to do the composing, and then I had about 10 days in the studio. And some of those days in the studio, we were running close to all day. Well, actually, we did most of it at night, because the studio was cheaper at night. So yeah, no, it was, after that, I needed some sleep. Unlike most film composers back then and even today, I base my writing on melodies. And, if I'd had a 96-piece orchestra, I wouldn't have needed melodies to get emotion, because you can get emotion out of a string section by writing anything. You can write any notes you want, and it's going to sound emotional, as long as, it's not too fast or too slow for the scene. With synthesizers, they don't create emotion on their own. Well, actually, nowadays you can, but back then they didn't. It was pretty one-dimensional sound. So the melodies are what carried the emotions of the scenes for me. And somehow, the first cue I sat down to write was the opening credits of the movie, a piece I called Kumite. And that melody just popped into my head as I started playing around. I put down a rough beat and I started playing with different sounds until something gave me goosebumps. I mean, that was basically the test for me. Did I get goosebumps from what I wrote? Okay, that's good. I came up with that melody and I used it throughout the film. And I guess it was sort of Jean-Claude's melody in a way. It was the triumphant melody. With other people, like for Bolo, I used just sounds, some nasty sounds. And I've had people email me over the years saying that when they were kids and heard that sound, it really scared them. So I guess I did that. I mean, in a way, I was writing almost like I would write for a cartoon. There were things missing from the film in terms of, I mean, these were fighters, not actors. And so giving these actors some emotion, some of it had to come from the music. And so that's what I really tried to do, was find the emotions that needed to be there, that weren't there, and add them. You know, the fights weren't so much emotion as just action. In fact, I looked at the fight scenes almost like, and I've said this before, almost like I was writing for a ballet, because the fights are not just random, they're choreographed. Same way you'd choreograph a dance for a ballet. So I had to try and find the music that fit that ballet. And so that's what I did. I saw it on a sound stage first, and then I saw it in a Canon screening that they had in summer of '87. So I'd seen it, but it was really, it made me feel great. I mean, I took different people different times to see it, and you know, I was proud of it. And hey, I did that. And I saw my name on billboards all over town, and you know, a composer that I'd studied with saw my name on a billboard in London and sent me a postcard saying how proud he was of that. That was cool. I think Frank saw it. I mean, what he told me was that he didn't even like the final cut until the music went in. He said that I saved the movie, as did the director's wife. True or not, I don't know. I don't know. You know, I didn't set out to create a classic. I set out to make enough money to pay my rent, and I loved writing that music. I had a great time doing it, but I never expected that 35 odd years later we'd still be talking about it, and that I'd still be getting royalty money from it. It's been an amazing ride. Who knew? And if anything, there are more fans today than there were then, because everybody that loves it shows it to their kids and their nephews, and nowadays even to their daughters and nieces, because I'm starting to get female fans. It's kind of weird. So, hey, I'm happy I got to be part of movie history somehow. It's a strange thing.
Mr. Dukes, you fought with inspiration. We of the Kokurukai salute you.
I mean, I heard all the rumors about the story being true or not true. That never mattered to me. I was dealing with it as a movie, and it was a good movie. I didn't care whether he made it up or not. Frank and I had lunch one day. He's a hustler. You know, he's definitely a hustler. He admitted to me he's probably been kicked in the head a few too many times. Didn't always make sense. He was just overflowing with all these plans of things he was going to do with me, which gradually over the months went away. I mean, even while we're having lunch, he calls some guy in New York and puts me on the phone. Oh, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And none of which happened. And I don't know. He's not somebody that I particularly worried about one way or the other. It's a guy that, for whatever reason, he was the inspiration of this movie. And this movie has been a big part of my life. So, you know, I don't have any negativity towards Frank. He didn't do anything to me. And I don't know why people get all upset about it being true or not true. It's the movie. You know, forget about the rest. I wasn't surprised that it did well when it first was released. That didn't surprise me because I thought it was going to be popular because Jean-Claude had this charisma, and there were some good fights, and there was a nice bad guy, and there was a little romance, but not too much. There was lots of conflict. You know, you need conflict in these movies. What I'm surprised about, I guess, first of all, is it became an international hit. In America, it was considered a B movie, but in a lot of foreign countries, it wasn't. It was considered mainstream. And maybe that's because they dubbed the voices of the actors, and it made them seem better. I don't know. I never actually watched it in a foreign language. But it was huge in a lot of places, in Europe, but also in Asia. I could see that Jean-Claude was going to make it big. He had this charisma that it was undeniable. And even then, he wasn't afraid to be the underdog. He wasn't afraid to make himself look bad if that was necessary. I mean, he didn't really do too much of that then, but if you watch Jean-Claude Van Johnson, that thing, he's not afraid to make fun of himself. He doesn't take it all that seriously that I can see. But he has this charm, and he has a sense of humor. And I think that humor is a key element to his success. Not just that he looked great, not just that he could fight, but he had a sense of humor. So, you know, yeah, I thought right from the first screening I saw of him, hey, this is going to make it. I didn't think it was going to make it this big for this long, but I thought it was going to be a success. And I was right. I was really stunned that Canada didn't release it for nearly a year after we finished it. It didn't make sense. And when they released it only in 5 states in the United States to fulfill their contractual obligations. And it charted in the top 20 from those 5 states. So then they released it nationwide, and it stayed on the charts for a few months. And you know, it didn't make amazing money in the United States compared to today, but it did well for 1988. And you know, yeah, I was happy.
I've worked hard